Okay, is this working? Gonna see if we can get set up here. Looks like I have some audio coming through. Welcome to our Indra Part 2 Mythstream. And I'm just waiting for Josephus to join me. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts that they'd like to have addressed or discussed today? Mercy and Thane, welcome. Yeah, just trying to get the ball rolling here. Just set my mic back up, and Josephus is setting his up. So he is going to tell us a bit about the Mediterranean Thunderer, the Mediterranean Indra parallels, and there's a lot to be said about that, and we'll see if we can touch on any further other branches and parallels from there. Baal, that's a good question. Probably not too much about Baal and that sort of thing, unless Josephus has any wisdom on that, or any commenters want to add any information on figures like that. But I don't have any particular insight about Baal, so I'd like to know more about how that worked in that sphere of things. Types of Vajra weapons. Yeah. What do you mean when you say types of Vajra weapons? Because I can think of the Vajra itself, and then we have the Vajra in Iran, and the Avesta that actually Mithra has. And so presumably those are very similar, coming from the same origin. But then we have Thor's hammer is quite different, of course, in some ways at least. And then we have the Fulmen, which we discussed briefly in the Mitra live streams. We discussed the Fulmen of Dies Fidius. So this in Dumazil's writing, he connects the Fulmen of Dies Fidius actually to the Vajra and the Vajra. Okay, here's Josephus now. Welcome, Josephus. I have the stream running already, so how's your mic sounding?
It should sound good, hopefully.
It sounds nice to me. How are you doing today?
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this will work.
Very good. How was your barbecue?
Everything good. Really
Good.
tasty Sicilian pork meat.
Good. Do Italians eat slowly compared to the other parts of the world, or is that not a real Italian thing?
Honestly, from what I gather, most cultures in the world have the same pace when eating, and they all like eating together and stuff. And
Yeah.
then you have the U.S. where this is not pretty much usual, right? Where eating is more of a necessity and something you do to survive than something you do as a sort of cultural practice
Mhm.
of, you know, um, being together with friends or family or whichever, or celebrating anything, right?
Well, yeah, it's all on a a scale. There's obviously some of that in America too, but we probably are faster. We probably program ourselves to rush through food more. I do.
So I guess we should move to the thunder god, which, as I'm sure has been already said in the first part of the stream, is slightly a misnomer. I mean, of course, we do see things such as Taranis, who is named after thunder. So, of course, it's not entirely a misnomer. But obviously, the thunder god is not the only thunder god, right? So, in Roman religion, you actually have at least nine thunder deities of Etruscan, supposed Etruscan origin, but most of them are actually well known to be of Indo-European origin and to have Indo-European comparanda both linguistically and mythologically. At any rate, we do have these multiple thunder deities, and the same can be said for Vedic tradition. So thunder alone is not the discerning element. Now,
Yeah, we should say just that Vedic deities. It seems like there is mention of Varuna connected to thunder in the Vedas, and then also even Rudra himself. His arrows are described as lightning arrows at certain points, and even then, like the Rudras or Maruts are connected to thunder and lightning in different abstract ways, I think, and storm. So yeah, it is a much more complicated picture. We have to keep repeating that to set the frame. But yeah, continue.
okay. So, as probably also has already been said in the first part of the stream, there is sort of an ambiguity as to whether the Greek comparandum for the thunder deity, the thunder warrior, more than anything, could be Ares or Heracles. Now, obviously, the case for Heracles has been extensively argued by Dumézil in the Stakes of the Warrior book, which is definitely a very in-depth examination of Hercules' career, side to side with some myths of Indra, of Starkadr, of Shishupala in India as well. So multiple characters from various Indo-European traditions. Uh, and there is also the possibility, in my opinion, which is not not extremely certain, but definitely should be taken into account, of Aries also reflecting that same kind of Indo-European type. Now, obviously, Ares and Hercules have grown in very different ways in Greek tradition. So Ares has even come to be somewhat devalued. So we see in Homeric poetry that he's sort of seen as a troublemaker and as especially a deity who is unable to stick to one side during the conflict. Obviously, in the Iliad of Homer, most deities are pretty coherent with their side. They are either pro-Greek or pro-Trojan, and some abstain from taking sides. Ares consistently moves from one side to the other and is called out for it throughout the course of the Iliad. So this should seem like an irrelevant detail, but actually this is somewhat paralleled by Indra in Vedic tradition, because it is said that Indra is invoked by both sides who are going to take part in the war, and he will choose more or less randomly which side he will favor and which one will lose his favor. So he's somewhat arbitrary in his decision, right? This is obviously well paralleled in Roman poetry, where we read of Mars Caicus, so the blind Mars, supposing this deity as being blind in the sense that he chooses randomly which side is going to win or lose. I mean, of course, it's not always that random, but in general, divine favor with this particular deity type can be somewhat ambiguous. And then obviously we have a functional sort of passage. I think it was book 5 of the Iliad, in which Zeus establishes clearly that war is a matter for Ares and Athena to deal with, and that Aphrodite should stick to works of love. And so this passage sort of cements an Indo-European tripartition between Zeus as the F1 figure, so the one who establishes the law and order of both God's society and the world as a whole. Then we have Ares and Athena as warrior deities, so as second function deities essentially. And then we have Aphrodite qualified as a third function deity. So this is one of the many examples in the Iliad and elsewhere in Greek literature where the Indo-European structure is bleeding through. Another passage, which is much later, but in my opinion also very conservative and worth taking into account, is a passage from Iamblichus' Life of Pythagoras, in which a number of Pythagorean teachings are discussed. Obviously, only the more exoteric ones, of course, but they're still listed pretty extensively. And in one of these precepts, the author says that Pythagoras urged his followers to offer libations before every meal by invoking Zeus, Heracles, and the Dioscuri, so the two sons of Zeus, Castor and Pollux. Now, this is pretty interesting to me because it looks exactly like the Indo-European tripartition that we're hoping to see from a Dumasilian perspective. Dumézil was somewhat pessimistic about the possibility of finding a perfect match for, say, the Roman archaic triad or the Mitanni pentad, right? He was somewhat skeptical of the possibility of finding anything like that in Greek material. But this passage from Iamblichus actually provides it for us. We have Zeus as the first function figure, and that's pretty straightforward. Then we have Heracles as the second function deity. And finally, we have the third function twins, right? So that's exactly what we're expecting to see in such a triad. Very similar to the Roman triad of Jupiter, Mars, and Quirinus. Quirinus is a single deity, right, in this Roman system, but he does have a twin. So we are still seeing a reflex of the third function twins, which we'll definitely talk about another time. Now, is it possible that both Ares and Heracles have inherited some material from this type? In my opinion, of course, it's a reasonable assumption, but I would like to bring the view's attention to a passage from Servius' commentary on the Aeneid, in which he discusses the common deity. Now, for the context of this passage, Aeneas obviously has come to Italy from Troy, so he is dealing with an unfamiliar culture, and people in Italy usually worship deities different than Aeneas' traditional deities, right? Um, so the one person that Aeneas can find is more culturally relatable is Evander, who is another king in Italy, but who is originally an exile from Greece. Troy had been conquered by Greeks one time before the Trojan War that we all know about, precisely by Heracles, actually. So Heracles had conquered Troy, and presumably Trojan culture, at least as imagined in the world of Homer and Virgil, was clearly indistinguishable from Greek culture of the same time. So Evander and Aeneas end up realizing that they both have some heroic and divine worship of Heracles, and this is exactly what the passage is talking about. Now, obviously, this is the first explanation that Servius is providing. So, obviously, um, Heracles being a Greek and therefore of the same origin as both Greeks and Trojans. Then Servius provides another very interesting and comparatively relevant explanation that Heracles is a common deity because he's common between gods and men. Then he provides a very bad etymology for Deus Fideus, which were, I mean, it's a very bad etymology. He's attempting to uh, treat Deus, which we have discussed in another live stream, as meaning a shining one or a day one, like related to the day. He is explaining it as deriving from medius, meaning middle. So that's somewhat an explanation that we can easily reject. But what he says is obviously that the Heracles is a middle point between mortality and godhood, and he's one of the deities that could be called medioxmy. So medioxmos is probably um, the derivative of medius, which means middle, and then a root meaning the highest part. So they are the most middle deities, right? It's sort of a double superlative of the fact that they are middle deities, and so this is pretty fitting with Indra as a deity of the atmosphere, which is exactly midway between heaven and earth. So a deity who is sort of also a linking point between celestial deities, maybe Mitra and Varuna, which are more strictly linked to the upper parts of the sky and more detached from human reality, and the deities of the third function, which are closer to humans and therefore humans themselves, right? We have the sort of mediating role of the second function as the center of this cosmic system. So another and the third explanation that Servius provides for this epithet of being the common god for Heracles is that, and I quote, and I'm translating from Latin, according to pontifical ritual, so the ritual that was carried out by pontiffs in ancient Rome, Heracles is the same as Mars. And then he goes on to argue that in Babylonian astronomy, the star of Mars is also considered the star of Heracles. That's somewhat obviously not strictly relevant to Indo-European comparisons, as interesting as it may be. Uh, but definitely the fact that in the pontiff's mind, at least if we are to trust Servius, Hercules and Mars were the same deity is quite a telling point, right? We have definitely some possibility, first of all, of Heracles, the Greek Heracles adopted as Hercules in Rome, uh, of him being obviously a clear parallel of other second function deities. Mars is pretty clearly a second function deity. Dumézil talks about it at length, despite some misinterpretations, especially from Rose, which try to overemphasize and take out of context the agricultural associations of Mars. But Mars is clearly, at the core, a warrior deity. So first of all, Hercules or Hercules can be identified with another warrior deity, but especially as Mars was clearly identified with the Greek Ares, I think this is probably an interesting point to bring up, and a point that could support the possibility of Hercules and Ares being um, two outcomes of the same Indo-European type, especially obviously as we see very often the doubling between a deity and one or multiple heroes in Greek tradition. So I'm thinking maybe of Zeus compared to Menelaus, right? The reconstruction of the Indo-European type should look at both gods and heroes, and obviously having both Ares as a deity and Heracles as one of the heroes alongside Achilles and others is definitely a helpful point, in my opinion. So we can probably have a look at the various Orphic and Homeric hymns to this deity. I don't know if you want to say anything in particular before we do so.
No, that's very interesting. I would like to discuss the distinction, of course, uh, and maybe the combination or how we can clarify Aries in terms of the Indra type versus the Vishnu type. I don't know if we want to do that at the end of going into all these details, though. So maybe we should just look at hymns and stuff, and we can kind of like have a more further discussion at the end if we have time.
Yeah, that is definitely fair. We can maybe start by looking at the hymns and see as things come up.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we're starting with the Homeric hymn to Heracles. Here you can see the epithet leon tothumon, meaning lion-hearted. This is pretty much standard material. So Hercules, son of Zeus, born, of course, in Thebes from Alcmene. Um, and what else do we have? Okay, so we have a reference here to the 12 labors which have been commanded by Eurystheus, his cousin. And then we have a final reference to his ascension to Olympus, his marriage to Hebe, which is the goddess of youth. Her name literally means youth in Greek. And that's pretty much it. So it's a very quick rundown of Hercules' life as understood by the audience of this hymn. Now it's worth noting that we do not have a single poem that summarizes everything from Hercules' life. We have plenty of local legends in which Hercules is said to have come to a particular place and founded a city or established some sort of custom in one place or another. But ancient Greece did not have like a single Heraclea in the way we have an Iliad. That came much later. There was some attempt by some poets to compile various myths about Hercules. So obviously this is not a Heraclea, but this obviously gives a very quick rundown of basic crucial elements that characterize Heracles and that could be recognized by virtually everyone in any part of Greece or the Greek speaking world. Um, and that obviously is pretty relevant. Dumézil also gives a rundown of other basic and fundamental traits of Heracles in Stakes of the Warrior once again. So especially in reference to other instances in which Heracles basically commits what we could call a sin, quote unquote sin. It's not really appropriate, maybe, to talk about it in these terms. That's some sort of fault in which he ends up offending one of the three functions of Indo-European society, and then has to make up for it in various ways. So that's definitely a relevant aspect. So this is pretty generic. I don't really see too much to discuss that is not overly specific. Um, so maybe we should go to the Orphic hymn to Heracles. Obviously, the Orphic hymn is much later than the Homeric hymn and has a sort of different feel and sort of understanding of this figure, right? Um, so we have Heracles, obviously the strong-hearted one, the strong one. Once again, the strong one. These are various synonyms to imply that he's strong. And here he is said to be a Titan. Now, this is obviously out of place in most mythological material, but here Hercules is clearly underlyingly identified with the sun. And so the sun is often called the Titan in poetry, and this sort of justifies the usage of this epithet in reference to Hercules, which would otherwise be pretty hard to justify, right? We would not definitely see that in Homer or Hesiod, for instance. So we have other epithets saying that he's obviously strong and that he rejoiced in the hard labors. Atla is the keyword here. He's obviously said to be a shapeshifter. That's once again somewhat unusual compared to the earlier, more exoteric understanding of Hercules. And he's also said to be, and that's really interesting, the father of time. Now, father of time is once again pretty out of place if we're looking at Hercules as a mortal hero, but here he's clearly once again understood to be the sun. Now, Indra is also said to be a form of the sun god, and pretty much most Vedic deities are. Also, Mitra, Varuna, Vishnu, they're all seen as aspects of the sun god, so it's not surprising for Hercules to be treated in the same way. And you can read Macrobius Saturnalia for evidence of pretty much any other deity being identified with the sun, and we're going to get back on that as well. So, unspeakable, wild hearted, much prayed to, powerful over everything, having an all powerful heart, great strength, archer, prophet. Now, that's another interesting, seemingly out of place epithet. Um, Now, I think that actually the combination of archer and prophet is pretty Apollonian, right? It's sort of once again emphasizing this identification with the sun, and obviously the sun by this stage, by the time Orphic hymns were written, was also clearly already identified with Apollo. So
Indra
you have
has Indra does have a bow as well in parts of Vedic material. So it's an interesting thing about the thunder that they do seem to have a famous bow. Like the bow of Heracles is sometimes people don't realize how kind of prominent it is in certain strata of the material, and then also same for Indra in the Vedas. In Stella book, she even explains the eons as if Rudra is like taking over the bow that had been Indra's. So that could be a misinterpretation of the order of things, or it could be something that was part of Indra being elevated to a more prominent role in the Vedas, or it could be this gesturing toward a high point where the thunder is identified with the sun, like you said, and kind of has this primordial moment. But yeah, the bow. This it's just an interesting thing that always catches my attention there. So yeah,
So actually, going back to the bow, it might be worth noting that as Dumézil has it, one characteristic of this warrior type is that he's able to wield various kinds of weapon skillfully. This is especially evident with Arjuna
Arjun.
in
That's what I was just my mind just went there. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, definitely. Like, he's a great bowman. Um, Rama, he's a bit more complicated comparatively. In my opinion, Rama is, well, it's not just my opinion; it's pretty much stated in the poems. But he's a sort of a mix between first function, second function, and third function deities. So
Yeah.
that's to keep in mind when trying to draw inferences maybe about a specific type from Rama. But he's also a great bowman, just like Arjuna. So I can definitely see being able to use the bow as characteristic um, of any second function hero, not just, of course, not just in the Greek or not just in the Vedic system, but in any of them basically. Uh, no, I'm seeing a commenter uh, basically saying that Vishnu is not in the Vedas. I mean, just read the Vedas; it's literally in there. Like, obviously, not necessarily everything that has been said about Vishnu later
Yeah.
is also found in the Vedas, so that is also to be kept in mind. But definitely, Vishnu is a Vedic character,
Yes.
and
There
he's
are
also called
there are
Upendra, so
right.
Indra's junior brother, basically, right? So definitely closely related to Indra.
Yeah, there are hymns. There are hymns, not a ton, not too many, relatively speaking, especially in the Rig Veda itself. But there are Rig Veda hymns addressed directly to Vishnu. So he's just not as prominent as you might later find him in India. But yeah, he is there. And then yeah, with Upendra, it really shows the sort of intertwining, the close connection of Indra and Vishnu, and that suggests you kind of need to look at that close intertwining of the types potentially in other branches as we sometimes see. So, okay, continue with what you were saying.
Okay, so going back to the hymn, what else we have? Okay, so he's all eating, all begetting, um, above everyone else, a helper to everyone else, um, who runs, basically civilizing the uncivilized tribes of mortals, um, bring about peace that allows children to grow. So basically, he's a bringer of peace, a pacifier of the world. Once again, maybe we will have a look at that also in relation to the Saturnalia. Um, Self-begotten. Now that is once again interesting, and once again should be linked back to the sun kind of characterization. Akamas, meaning unwearying, is also a typical epithet of the sun. Um Best gem of the earth. More than gem, it's more like the basically the sprout of a plant, right? Blastema is more of a sprout. So the thundering with first begotten arrows. So that's once again interesting. Once again ties back into the archer imagery and also presumably solar imagery. So the bolis, it could be understood as any sort of arrow or dart, but also specifically as the sun's rays. And clearly being the first begotten arrows, we're clearly talking about something related to the principle, to the sun.
And the word specifically, one of those words was thundering.
Yeah, strapsas. This is basically the past, like it's the aorist participle of strapto, which is a verb meaning to thunder. It's a very interesting word because it has many variants in Greek, and some of these variants are clearly influenced by the word aster, meaning star. This is one of the variants that is not influenced by aster, but the meaning is clearly thundering. So yeah, definitely relevant here that we're dealing
Yes,
with this kind of verb that we usually see in reference to maybe Zeus, and
right.
then we see it
Great.
applied to Hercules for once. Yeah. So obviously the question could be what do the sun and thunder have in common? But presumably in the worldview of whoever wrote the hymn, and we have parallels and explanations of this kind of worldview. For instance, in authors such as John Lydus, one of the authors from late antiquity that preserved much about traditional pagan lore. Um, Thunder was understood to be the fire in the element of air, and the sun was understood to be the fire in heaven or the fire in itself, right? Heaven being the closest we can get physically to fire as an element. So definitely there is no contradiction between thunder and um, and the sun, as they are both forms of the same fire on different planes of existence. I'm, I think we could have brought it up already when discussing the Mitra type, but it's definitely always good to keep that in mind for both the Mitra type and the Indra type, and for various other deities which are associated with both the sun and or thunder, which are a great number of deities across Indo-European traditions. Now, I'm seeing, okay, yeah, I'm seeing once again the comment Mars is a military agricultural deity. Yes, he's military mostly, agricultural not so much. He's If you look at Dumézil's explanation of the agricultural rituals in which Mars is invoked, it's clear that Mars is invoked because of his military role um, to protect agricultural
Right.
land. But he's not doing anything specifically to say make vegetables grow. He's just protecting
Mhm.
them from foreign armies, from internal enemies, from metaphysical enemies. He's basically just defending the field.
Right, right.
Now,
That's really important. Yeah, I'll let you continue there. And but yeah, just I found Dumasil's argument that's in archaic Roman religion, I believe, right?
yeah, definitely.
And I found that very satisfying. So anybody curious about this question, this theory of the like as if Mars was only agricultural originally and just became warrior associated or something. Um, I think Dumasil really clarifies the picture. It was convincing to me that exactly as you said, he's just much more the protector of fields, and that's because he's the warrior god and he's a protector god. Um, and you can also, of course, not so much connected to that specific Roman ritual, but Thor, for example, and even Indra, they are involved in the bringing of rains sometimes. So the thunder can also but that doesn't change the fact that he's the warrior god fundamentally. So those things can overlap, is the point. But yeah, continue.
Yeah, also to kind of clarify to this commenter, yeah, when we talk about a thunder type deity or Indra type deity, we're referring to a very specific kind of deity, right? So not every deity who wields a thunder is necessarily a thunderer, the kind of deity that we're discussing today. And also,
It means they
last but
come
not
from. It means they come from the same root. That's the point. So you can have this Proto-Indo-European Indra thunderer type, right? And they're going to go into each branch. Each branch is going to carry down that god, that their version of that god, and it's entirely possible for one of them to kind of leave the actual thunder aside and not have it so prominent. But you want to try to trace to that shared root, um, and even though Mars's connection to thundering, right, seems to have been superseded by Jupiter's, I guess you could say. Then
Yeah, just to some degree though, because
okay,
Servius does mention Mars being a wielder of thunderbolts.
okay,
So
there you
therefore,
go.
he's
Well,
not the main guy
yeah,
that is associated with thunderbolts. That's obviously Jupiter. But that being said, Mars is still pretty clearly one of the thunder deities in at least some Roman traditions, right? So he's
yeah, great.
still he hasn't forsaken his thundering
Right.
aspect.
Right. But the point is, like, it can be kind of lessened. But that doesn't change the fact that you can trace by other facets of the god that he comes from this same shared root with Indra, whereas Jupiter really doesn't in any specific way. He comes from a different shared original archetype deity that we discussed in our previous streams. And so the emphasis on the thunder can kind of shift a little bit between the sovereign god and this thunderer type, it seems. But we have to look at the specifics, like you said. So, okay, I'll let you keep going.
Okay, no, actually, before I go back to the hymn, there's also a very interesting and insightful question by James Fields. Is there a surviving myth of Mars slaying a dragon like the other thunder gods do? So, to my knowledge, no, but I would still advise to look into Weiss' argument, and actually Nick Allen's arguments, especially. Uh, well, Weiss compares Cuchulainn, so it might be another topic for another time, to some Roman myths. But especially, we do have Nick Allen's argument about Tullus Hostilius. Now, Tullus Hostilius is the third king of Rome, and he's pretty clearly the king of Rome who is most clearly coded as a second function character, as the warrior, the aggressive warrior who brings about conquest wars, unlike maybe Ancus, who only, or at least mostly doesn't do war, but he does some level of war as a defensive tactic, and as a way to found commercial colonies. So he doesn't really do the same kind of war that Tullus does. And Tullus and Metius Fufetius has already been compared by Dumézil to Indra and Vritra, and also the death of Tullus Hostilius in Nick Allen's argument offers a parallel to Vritra and Indra, but in a sort of flipped way. So it's definitely something to look into on the heroic side, even when the strictly divine side of mythology in Rome uh, doesn't have, at least to my
Yeah.
knowledge, a specific kind of dragon slaying myth.
So, what was the name of the figure that you said would stand for the dragon that Tullius Hostilius fights?
Metius Fufetius. Yeah, it's
With an
basically the king of Alba, the last king of Alba,
okay.
who is very brutally slain. Actually, he's like
Hmm.
his body is tied to four different horses, which are made to go into different directions,
Hmm.
basically splitting out his
Well,
body. Yeah,
well,
in a very
as we looked into in the last in part one of this stream, Vritra in the Rig Vedic hymn is like it says that all of his limbs essentially are cut or ripped off of him. He's like a trunkless, and then he's also castrated as well. So it's very that could be connected somehow, right? That could be similar to being kind of pulled by all your limbs by the horses. Maybe I could see it at least. I like that kind of argument. So I do think when you look at Dumasil's overall argument of the sequence of the kings, where Romulus is first function Varuna coded, perhaps, and then Numa is the king who comes after. He's more peaceable, and he is Mitra coded, and then Tullius Hostilius, does he come right the very next, or he's one of the next?
yeah, he's the very next.
He's
Like
very
he's
next. So
just
you have
right
him,
after
yeah,
Numa.
yeah. So you have him like three in a row, and then so he is this more warlike figure, and he does these particular things. So to me, it when you look at the details, it is a pretty strong. I like Dumasil's argument on that. So it's convincing to me, as especially with um, the other stuff regarding the Sabine women and how that parallels the Aesir-Vanir War. So there's definite mythic material in that sequence that's very strong. So okay, anything else you'd like to touch on?
Yeah, I think we've said everything in our like digressions.
Mhm.
So we could go back to the hymn.
Yes.
So this passage here is possibly the most strongly solar coded that we have so far, and we pretty much have seen already plenty of solar material applied to Hercules in the Orphic hymn. So you who bring around your head the dawn and the dark night, um, basically creeping. The herpon is creeping like a snake, precisely, right? It's the term that you would see applied to a snake or to some sort of critter, creeping from the 12 risings to uh, well, creeping through your labors from the 12 risings into the 12 settings. So this is presumably understanding Hercules as the sun who overcomes his 12 labors, which represent the 12 signs of the zodiac. And so they represent the yearly cycle of the sun. So this is pretty much the strongest point for Hercules as a solar deity that we see in the Orphic hymn specifically. So, well, we have a bunch of usual epithets that we see for most Orphic deities anyway, and then we have a very interesting petition to the god. Right after saying all his epithets, he's actually made a request, which is to bring about mitigations of illnesses. This is very Apollonian to me. It's very solar once again, with the sun's virtue, which is the virtue to bring about equipoise. Health in ancient Greek thought is understood to be the same as equipoise. So the sun is the god who can bring about healing, who can bring about purification, which is pretty similar to healing. It's pretty much the same concept of re-establishing order and equipoise in a person or in a community. Uh, So, well, of course, he's asked to send evil away, and basically other forms of evil. Kalepos and kakos are various forms of evil, the evil and painful things, basically. So he's asked to avert evil. Averting evil is actually pretty similar to what we see for Mars in Roman prayers. He's asked to avert enemies both visible and invisible, to avert illnesses, and to avert enemies of various kinds. So there is definitely some parallel between the petition that we see for Heracles and the petitions that we would see, say, in Cato's book on agriculture, in which he petitions Mars precisely to send away a number of physical and metaphysical enemies. So it's definitely interesting and definitely plays very well into the second function deity's role as a sort of defender, as a sort of warrior, as a sort of protector, of course, protecting those who invoke him and fighting off people or beings, including illnesses, who will oppose the worshipper of these deities. So this is um, this is what we could say about the hymns of Heracles. Now we can actually bring up a passage of Macrobius Saturnalia, which is actually worth noting because it once again plays into the identification between Heracles and the sun. And here he provides a very interesting etymology for the name. So he says that Heracles, so the Greek name of Heracles, should be understood as Hera's Kleos, glory of Hera, and that is well known. But obviously, he interprets Hera in the way that has become customary, at least from Plato onward, probably earlier than Plato, because we already have, possibly from Empedocles onward, I would say. So Hera, since Empedocles is regarded as a goddess of the air, so Heracles is the glory of the air, the glory of the atmosphere, we could say in a more modern um, terminology. And so obviously the glory of the atmosphere is the sun. So this is once again playing into that kind of identification. But it's very interesting that that the author Macrobius would pick air as a sort of crucial point in his etymology, because it's pretty common for second function deities to be associated with air or wind. We also have Vayu in Vedic tradition, which is a warrior, and he's often closely associated with Indra. And Indra is sometimes framed as the leader of the Maruta, which are the warband of the god Vayu. So we definitely have a close interplay between atmosphere and Indra. And obviously, thunder plays also very well into that, as thunder is the atmospheric fire, almost as if it was an atmospheric form of the sun. So it's really interesting to me. Now, as for another, maybe more historically and comparatively sound as well explanation of Hercules' name, I would refer our viewers to Gregory Nash, who wrote extensively about Greek epic, also in a comparative Indo-European perspective. And obviously, he sees it as meaning that Heracles is the hero who derives his glory from the goddess Hera, specifically because this goddess, by making him mad, forced him to undergo the 12 labors as a sort of expiation. And so the 12 labors are the source of his glory. And it's especially relevant that at the end of his human life, as told by Diodorus Siculus, Heracles obviously burnt his mortal body on the fire and ascended onto Olympus and simulated being born from Hera as if he was biologically her son. So everything that Hera does and that would seemingly be ascribed to some sort of jealousy, right? And in more exoteric retellings of the myth, definitely looks like simple jealousy from his father's wife. starts to make sense from the perspective of Hera becoming Hercules' mother, and so being the one who kind of wants to test him as a way to ensure that he is worthy of his godhood. Right? It's a really interesting topic, especially in a comparative perspective with Shishupala and with other characters from Sarkad as well. But the very special relationship of motherhood between Hera and Heracles seems almost unparalleled in the other Indo-European versions of the tale, where we definitely see helping deities who put the hero to the test, but not maybe to the point of becoming the hero's new mother, basically. So I don't know if there's anything else we should address about Hercules before moving um, to the hymns of Ares. I don't know if there's anything in the comments.
That seems good. Only thing I guess is there is an important, there's a lot of important comparisons in specific that Dumasil makes with Heracles. One of the major themes he points to is this concept or this theme of the sins of the sins of the warrior god, basically, and we have this with Indra killing Vritra and Vishvarupa, the the Tricephal, and he tries to wash off his like multi-part sins in the waters with successive washings and things like that, and has to run off to hide in the wilderness in a lake or something like that. And then you have Heracles. I believe this just pertains to his 12 labors that he goes on, and the reason he gets into the 12 labors, and then his sort of ultimate outcome that leads to his death and things like that. So, is there anything on that you'd like to clarify how that connects, or that you could help me recall the details of how the sins of Heracles come into play?
Well, I mean, the first sin is pretty straightforward, as killing his own children, so violating family bonds, which are one aspect of first function roles of deities and heroes. So he has to obviously go to another first function figure, which is Eurystheus, who is the king of Argos and Tiryns, and he's also the cousin of Heracles. It's also maybe worth noting that Heracles was supposed to inherit that kind of throne, and he actually lost it to Eurystheus because Eurystheus was born preterm, and Heracles was born after the expected term by the machinations of Hera, according to the Iliad. So Eurystheus is now the king, and Heracles um, is given 10 labors to perform by Eurystheus. He performs 10 labors, but two of these labors involved help from another person, so Eurystheus did not regard them as valid, and so the number was raised to make up for them with two other labors, resulting in the 12 labors that everyone knows about. So that's actually pretty interesting. And we see the topic of 10 that become 12. Also in the Roman calendar, traditionally Romulus only had 10 months, and then Numa added two other months to make 12 months. So maybe there's some topic there. So this is the first thing. The first thing is killing the children, and being the expiation is undergoing the 12 labors. The second sin is the killing of Iphitus, who was unarmed. So killing someone who is unarmed is obviously a violation of the warrior's code of conduct, so to speak. And so this is a violation of second function aspects. I'm not sure what expiation he had to undergo. Um, Actually, I might just look that up before I say anything incorrect.
Sure.
Dumézil talks about it at length, but
Yes. I
yeah.
forget the details myself.
So what do we have? Um, let's see. Okay, it doesn't say. Let's look at other pages until I end up finding what happened
Sure.
to her.
Yeah.
So like
And yeah, I'll just say to the audience just that it seems like in the Indra myth and in the theme, I think it's Starkather who you mentioned, who is the Norse comparison, but that it is this sin that has a functional, it has like tripartite function, relevance. He's kind of like committed a sin that's relevant to each function, and so yeah, it's somehow embedding this functional ideology in his sins and in the way he then has to expiate them, presumably.
yeah, so the expiation for killing Iphitus is 1 year of servitude under Omphale. So Omphale is a queen of Lydia, so an Anatolian queen, and she basically forces Heracles not to partake in the manly activities that we usually see. So he could obviously not partake in war, not partake in. I think there was something like probably working outside of the home, basically, which was males' usual activity in ancient Greece. And he was basically forced to work indoors on textiles. So he was somehow feminized, deprived of his very masculine warrior essence for a year. Now that's interesting because we also have a parallel with Arjuna. Arjuna is cursed by a sort of basically nymph, an apsara, to be impotent for a year. And during this year, he is taken as a teacher of singing and dancing at the basically to teach those arts to princesses in a royal court. So it's definitely interesting that we see the most masculine warlike deity or hero in these specific instances um, being deprived, even if only temporarily, of his masculinity, which is so crucial to his role, right? It's really terrible as an expiation to look at it like that. So that's the second sin. The third sin is basically violating his marriage bonds to take a new wife. And the expiation is being gifted a tunic, which had been basically dyed with the blood of a centaur, which was poisonous. So when he put the tunic on, he was so affected by the poison that basically his body started corrupting, and he realized that he could no longer live in such body, and arranged for his body to be burnt on the pyre, and then his soul went on to have apotheosis and being somehow simulating a rebirth from Hera, as Diodorus has it. So yeah, we have the three sins: killing his children, um, killing an innocent man, and then violating marriage bonds. And we have the three punishments for the three quote unquote sins. The three I would rather call them faults or violations of the Indo-European order,
Hmm.
right? Um, so that's definitely interesting. Uh, Definitely because it points to the hero's struggle to achieve godhood. This sort of, and also once again, it ties very well back into what Servius said about Hercules being an intermediate deity and an intermediary between gods and humans. He has some of the defects that humans have. Obviously humans have difficulty with leading a perfect life if anything, because of their bodies. Also because, well, I mean, maybe it's also related to the bodies, but also their lack maybe of memory, awareness. So they might end up promising one thing and doing the opposite, setting a rule for themselves and breaking it. And this is also paralleled by the three sins of the warrior. But then he's also a deity, like he fully achieves godhood, and obviously this is sort of a hopeful message for people of Greek religion and generally of Indo-European religions that achieving gnosis is possible. It's also really interesting that Heracles is the one who frees Prometheus. Now, Prometheus is symbolic of humankind's condition. He's the ancestor of all humans, or creator of humans in other versions of the myth. Uh, and Prometheus was also argued to be the human soul uh, in by commenters such as John Gallin, one of the other, just like John Lydus, one of the commenters who wrote in late antiquity, trying to preserve as much pagan material as it was possible under those very hard times for pagans. So Prometheus as the human soul is punished, obviously, as we should probably remind, uh, ultimately because of the sacrifice of Mycone. Mycone is, well, it's a town in Boeotia, but the name of Mycone comes from mekon, which in Greek means um, narcotic flower. It's a poppy, right? Poppy, which is a flower from which narcotics were produced. So it's a reference to forgetfulness, to sleepiness, to lack of awareness. And in this place, the first animal sacrifice was performed by Prometheus. In the animal sacrifice, Prometheus divided the portions of gods and humans. So this was symbolic of splitting humans and gods apart, making them two separate categories. And this effectively ended the Golden Age. The Golden Age is the time when humans and gods can eat together at the same table. And this obviously means that there is no hard separation between them. They are one and the same, really deep down. And so Heracles, as the one who frees Prometheus from his punishment on the Caucasus Mountains, is definitely a very interesting symbol, right? The symbol of the conjunction between humankind and true divinity. And obviously overcoming with heroic strength, heroic vitality, all the limitations that humankind has imposed upon itself. So that's it. I think
Yes.
about Heracles. I don't know if there's anything else
Very
that you
good. I think that's good. I think we can jump to the next
yeah,
figure.
definitely. We can jump to Ares. Now, about Ares, the Homeric hymn is actually somewhat complicated. So most philologists argue that this was not composed in the Archaic period, unlike most other Homeric hymns. It was probably a Hellenistic composition, so pretty late. Obviously, we could debate on how clearly and strongly we can debate about the date, whether it was really Hellenistic, maybe it was classical, what point of Hellenism. Of course, every um, ancient book begs the questions of authorship and dating. But at any rate, this is definitely later than most other Homeric hymns. That's pretty much clear from the language, meter. So let's see what of its content can be relevant for comparative purposes. So obviously we have plenty of epithets that refer either to him being strong or to him being bearing weapons, right? So bearing a shield and a helmet and a spear. So this ties once again into what Dumézil says about the warrior being able to wield different kinds of weapon, being skilled at various kinds of warfare. Um, he's the bulwark of Olympus. This is, like Hercos is usually said of warriors whose strength is so relevant that they alone are a sort of defense system for their whole army. So that's a very strong connotation of Ares as a war god. He's the father of victory. Um, Now, this genealogy is not the same that we find in Hesiod, for instance, but I mean, it's pretty logical that victory would follow from war, so from Ares' domain ultimately. And here that's very interesting. He's the helper of Themis, the goddess of justice. So, in a certain way, war is rationalized as a way to enact justice. This actually ties really well into the Trojan War as a war that was commanded by justice. It was only fair for Menelaus to move war, and even if Menelaus attempted diplomacy before moving on to war, ultimately the means to uphold Themis and to achieve Nike, so to uphold justice and achieve victory, had to be war. So let's see. He's also actually very interesting. He's qualified uh, as the leader of the most righteous men. So righteous men are the ones who go to war. Basically, that's a very uh, strong moral connotation of war as something positive and rightful. He's the scepter holder of courage, um, and he revolves in a fire shining circle. Now, the fire shining circle is somewhat ambiguous. Now, obviously, this could refer to either the sun or the planet Mars. I feel like the planet Mars would make a bit more sense, but really either is possible. It really boils down to whether we interpret fire shining, puraugea, as meaning shining like fire, as in being a ball of fire in the way that the sun is, or whether we understand it as having a fiery reddish color, which is the color of the planet Mars. Uh, okay. Obviously, here we have some more context. So, in the sevenfold circles of heaven, so obviously it's referring to one of the planets, but it doesn't specify still whether it's the planet of Mars or the planet of the Sun. Um, let's see what else do we got here. Okay, obviously here it talks about the horses, but this is once again pretty stereotypical. Every heavenly body, the sun, the moon, the dawn, all have their horses that bring them on their uh, path in the sky, according to the poets. And then we have actually a pretty long petition compared to the short petitions that we usually find in Orphic hymns and also in many Homeric hymns. Um, he is once again addressed as the helper of mortals and the giver of courageous youth. I think it's also interesting that the word for youth is hebe, which is the same word that we would apply if it were a proper name to Hercules' wife. Obviously, youthfulness is a key component in second function figures. Second function figures are warriors, so they have the youth and physical strength to take part in war, and maybe they're also young enough to afford taking part in war, maybe without the concerns that an old person would have in the same situation. Okay, so beautifully shining your light from above upon life. So I guess upon living beings and living things. Um, and what else do we have? Okay, so basically he's asked to boil away evilness, bitter evilness, and to hypognamsai. This verb is pretty uncommon. Let's see if we have. Okay, it's only attested in this hymn, so just for context. So to bend the where was it? To bend the uh, basically the tendence to do trickery of the soul. So I guess he's invoked for his martial quality, also as a sort of, once again, upholder of justice, corrector, and so he's maybe contrasted with the appetitive soul, right? Now, psyche alone could be any part of the Platonic soul; it's the soul in general. But here we have pretty clearly psyche contrasted with the thumos. So thumos clearly points to the spirited soul. Now, the Platonic system of soul is pretty similar to the Indo-European system of society. So we have the rational soul, which is a sort of first function, the one who rules. Then we have the thumetikon, so the spirited soul, which is the one who is more active and is more warlike, and it's also evidently here associated most closely with Aries. And then we have the appetitive soul, which is the part of the soul which is maybe more associated with Aphrodite, and which is also clearly closely resembling the third function. So the function of production and bodily production, bodily pleasures, sensory pleasures, all these kind of things. So basically, here Aries is clearly understood. I would say definitely in at least a classical, if not already Hellenistic way. So he's both associated with either the planet Mars or the Sun. Maybe the ambiguity is also not entirely unwanted. And he's also obviously understood as an upholder of justice and understood as associated with the spirited soul, as opposed to what we can easily assume is supposed to be the appetitive soul. So in a clearly Platonic, Pythagorean, Hellenistic kind of understanding of this deity once again, even though it's in the collection of Homeric hymns. And what else do we got? Well, okay, he's also obviously asked to uphold peace. Now, this is pretty logical actually. Peace is only really upheld uh, because of war. Like at least in the ancient conception, um, for instance, Roman pax is also clearly understood as deriving from conquest and subjugation of the enemies, not just from being pacifist in a modern sense. And so finally, he's asked to send away um, the Keras, which are goddesses of ruin and death. So he's basically once again called in as a protector, pretty much in the same way as the Roman Mars and also the Orphic Heracles. So that's the Homeric hymn to Ares. Now let's look at the Orphic hymn to Ares, which is pretty pretty much shorter. You might notice that the same wording that we also see in the hymn to Heracles is also used by the Orphic hymns in reference to Ares. So the same adjectives that I'm highlighting here, you can also find here. So they're the same adjectives in both hymns. Then following those adjectives, which basically mean that he is strong, uh, Ares is also said to be rejoicing in weapons, unconquered, slayer of men, um, the one who, well, I guess it should be understood, the one who defends the walls, even though literally is the one who fills up the walls. King Ares, uh, who makes a clashing sound with weapons, um, always busy in homicides, rejoicing in the blood shed by warriors, uh, once again making a warlike sound, terrible, who rejoice in swords and spears, Okay. Okay. What is Amuson? Let me look this one more up. Okay. So okay. Literally, Amuson means without song. So basically, he's happy in discordant warfare. Like without the music means being discordant, right? Being without the virtue of unity and harmony. So discordant warfare with swords and spears. Um, and what else do we got here? Okay, so here we start the petition in the last three lines. So he's asked to stop basically rabies-like strife. Lusso-san refers to Lussa, which is rabies, and which is also metaphorically the rage of the warrior, especially in the Iliad. Lussa is often associated with Achilles, of course, as well as Manes, which is more usual kind of wrath or rage. Um without Okay, so basically he's asked to stop this sort of rabies-like strife and to lift up the suffering that oppresses the soul, and to return to the pleasures of Cupris, which is supposed to be the name of Aphrodite, so to basically go back to the pleasures of love, and to the villages of Luaios, so the god of wine, to basically um, the celebration of countryside festivals of fertility, and then to change the power of weapons for the works of Deo. Deo is the goddess of cereals. So he's basically what the Orphic hymn is asking is for Ares understood to be in a much less flattering way compared to maybe the Homeric hymn. He's understood to be a god of warfare, bloodshed, violence, disharmony, disunity, and so he's asked in some way to change his attitude, to go back to love, wine, and grain, so to the field of third function activities, and so basically go back to peace. In some way, it's similar to how the Homeric hymn asks for heirs to maintain peace, but it's also different. In the Orphic hymn, war is more devalued. I think this has to do in the Orphic hymn with the conception of war as referring to a lack, once again, of harmony, and this is pretty clear by this adjective actually, amusos, so lacking the muses, lacking the harmony. The muses are obviously supposed to bring harmony to the cosmos, and they are dependent upon Apollo, so the god who is most closely associated with healing, equipoise, harmony, music, right? Um, and also, it's really interesting that he would be invoked to actually depose his weapons. In some way, this is very similar to the Roman understanding of Mars and Quirinus. So, in Roman understanding, Quirinus is sometimes framed as an aspect of Mars. So, Quirinus is the god of peace, agriculture, pleasures. So he would definitely feel at home in like the last two verses of the Orphic hymn to Ares. Um, and there's a sort of alternation between the war season in which Mars is predominant and the who is also by the way called Mars Gradius, so a name which might derive from the word meaning to walk. So the Mars who goes forth into battle, but it might be a false etymology. At any rate, we have part of the year dedicated to Mars Gradius, and then we have a part of the year in which Quirinus predominates. as a god of peace and of productive activity. So there's this sort of interplay between second function and third function, and I think the Orphic hymn clearly captures it, but seems to favor the third function as an ideal to tend towards, as opposed to maybe the Homeric hymn, in which all the three functions have some leeway, but the second function is dignified as a sort of enforcer and defender of the first function against anything that threatens more of a functional order. That's at least my comparative understanding of these two hymns to Aries in the context of Indo-European comparisons, especially.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that. So okay, that is fascinating, and I would like to, if we have a few more minutes here, since you're here, I would love to get your perspective on sort of one of the complications in this picture that I mentioned earlier. That it's sort of a problem for me picturing the comparative scene and that sort of stuff around Aries, because okay, the way I would frame my issue, or the way I'm approaching it, is that when I look at Aries, I'm looking for a holistic comparative picture, of course, but really persuasive to me are narrative myths, right? Um, and they help me ground things, at least. And so with Aries, it's a little bit difficult in terms of um, narrative myths connecting to Indra. And if there are any, before I continue, you could bring them up. Did you mention any as we went through, or is this mostly like a structural and attribute based connection that you're describing?
Okay, so I think it's largely structural. Obviously, we see plenty of instances in which Aries sort of fills the second function slot in such a clear and straightforward manner. And sometimes we have Aries and Athena. So this couple is sort of reminiscent of Indra and Vishnu in the Vedic material.
Yes.
But I think there are some narrative similarities as well, and this is especially evident, in my opinion, in the story of Ascalapus. Ascalapus in the Iliad is one of the sons of Ares, um, who is killed in the conflict and results in Ares' great rage, and on him switching sides and ultimately being talked out of the conflict by other deities. And we also have like scenes in which the interfunctional dynamics are pretty clear, with Zeus as an enforcer of first function and Ares as a representative of the second function. And I think that overall, this very little story is similar to both the wider story of the Iliad. So Ares is almost like a divine version of what Achilles is, right? With Ascalapus as a sort of understudy of Patroclus, as the um, dearest and nearest person to the second function hero, who is killed and results in the second function hero's moment of sort of conflict and rebellion to the wider mission, which is provided by the first function deity, right? And also, well, there are also, by the way, similarities in the formulaic expressions that are used in reference to, say, Agamemnon and Achilles versus Zeus and Ares, referencing the Ascalapus issue. So I think there's definitely an understanding from both Homer himself and possibly a deeper tradition about this sort of parallel. But also, there's a very strong similarity to the story of Arjuna and Abhimanyu in Vedic, well, post-Vedic in
Yes.
material, right? Abhimanyu is also the son of Arjuna, just like Ascalapus is the son of Ares. Um, Maybe like Patroclus, who is a more distant relative of Achilles, and more importantly, his servant. So it's a more complicated situation. But at any rate, I think there is possibly an Indo-European antecedent for this kind of dynamic with the second function deity losing either a son or someone who is very close to him and switching sides, or in the case of Achilles and Arjuna, not really switching sides, but at least not fighting temporarily for their own side um, as a result of this, right? And so also having some sort of conflict with the first function character as a result of this death, or in circumstances related to this death anyway. And this is also clearly paralleled in the Irish story of Turan, that I guess has been already discussed, but I mean it's pretty
Right.
clearly the same kind of motif. It's the second function hero who loses his sons. In the Irish version, it's three sons and not just one, and loses them, um, resulting in a conflict. In the Irish version, also as a result of a conflict with the first function deity Lu.
Okay, very good. Yeah, that helps me a lot to kind of ground what might be going on here. So, Ascalaphus is the son of a Stygian river god, Acheron, and he told the other gods that Persephone had eaten pomegranate seeds. Persephone
Oh
was
no, that's
obliged. Oh, no, different
another
Ascalaphus.
character
Okay,
that is
sorry,
in
sorry.
the like. There's a couple of characters. One is in the Persephone
Okay.
cycle. It's not
Oh,
clear
here
if
it
they're
is.
like the
Sorry.
same or they're probably not supposed to be the same.
Okay,
I
I found the right one. Okay, sorry about that.
yeah
So, son of Ares and the Minian princess Astioche, daughter of King Actor. Ascalaphus was a king of the Minians and twin brother of Ialmenos. These brothers were counted among the Argonauts and the suitors of Helen, and led the Orchomenian contingent in the Trojan War, where Deiphobos threw a spear and killed him. Interesting, interesting, interesting. Okay, so Deiphobus killed him, and that's Deiphobus seems to be a Rudra type parallel, potentially at least, right?
yeah, precisely. And it's also interesting that Achilles himself dies at the end of a Rudra type because he's killed by
Mm.
Apollo. So it's
Ah,
definitely it could play into that kind of situation. Obviously, Arjuna does not die at the hands of anyone else; he just dies on his own. And then Thor dies at the hand of the serpents. It's probably more complicated. We do not have a straightforward Rudra as the killer of, say, of someone who is related to the F2 function. It's not maybe
mm-hmm.
too straightforward, but it might still be worth looking into as a broader
Yeah,
tendency, right?
yeah, because you don't have Indra dying per se, and you don't have. Let's see, what are we looking? I mean, we're looking at the well, you were saying Achilles dies. That's it. That's the Thunderer, but then also this son of Ares, so it's not 1-to-1 on that. Um, but
Yeah,
anyways, yeah,
maybe it's more one-on-one to Abhimanyu. So that would
yeah.
be Jayadratha, the killer of
Mm,
Abhimanyu.
okay.
Jayadratha is known for kidnapping Draupadi, so maybe
Huh.
there's something somewhat reminiscent, maybe more of Paris than of, say, the Epobos, who also ends up marrying Helen, but after Paris has kidnapped her.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Mm. Okay, well, that's something more to look into. So, to continue the way then, with that important, I think, crucial piece added to the picture, the way I'll kind of like frame the issue is that um, when I've looked at Ares, the an even fuller myth, you could say, an even like more extensive narrative myth is when it depends how you frame that as well. But when, of course, he has an affair with Aphrodite, and this is the wife of the fire god Hephaestus, and so it seems potentially to parallel when Cuchulainn has an affair with the wife of Mannanon, the fire god, and then when there's actually I've given the verses elsewhere in Puranic material where Krishna has an almost liaison with the spouse of Agni, the fire god himself, but essentially sends her away, and then it's like he sort of promises her that they can potentially be together after she is with her spouse Agni. And in the Cuchulainn story, he eventually sends the spouse of Mannanon back to Mannanon. So there's similar themes there. So it strikes me that could be a Vishnu type story, right? And then when you look at Achilles, he has these fundamentally, Indra aligned or Arjuna aligned in particular, like we just discussed. He is quite similar to Arjuna in a lot of ways, including just being the sort of focal point warrior hero who has this morose. He retires from battle, or at least pauses from the battle to over sort of some kind of conflict, internal conflict that he's having related to this and that, and then also Arjuna and Achilles both have, whether or not this is connected to that other thing I just mentioned, they both have a conflict with the sovereign as well. Arjuna has a conflict with Yudhishthira about Yudhishthira kind of insults him for not having defeated Karna yet, I think is what it is, and then in some way in some way his bow insults his bow in some way or something like that, and so Arjuna has kind of like reacts against Yudhishthira because of that in a way that's similar to Achilles reacting against the sovereign Agamemnon, things like that. So there's a lot of thunderer stuff with Achilles, I think, as we've discussed. But then there does seem to be this story of Krishna rubbing the milk and some kind of food paste, magical milk paste on himself to make himself invulnerable, but then being shot. And someone suggested to me that this story doesn't exist in the Mahabharata, but I think, Josephus, you were there when Tamon and I were going through the Mahabharata there, and there is actually, it is in the Mahabharata, at least it's alluded to, and so he dug up that there is the Pune Mahabharata, let's see, verse 38 to 39, chapter 144, Anushasana Parva, and it's talking about, because you have smeared your body, as long as you wish, you will not suffer any fear from death. Why did you not smear the soles of your feet too? Acting in that way, you have not done something that is agreeable to me. Let's see. And that is addressing a different figure, but then it is alluded to in terms of what Krishna himself does, or something like that. So I would just suggest that needs to be looked into more, so we can pin down exactly how this story occurs in the Mahabharata, right? But yeah, this is the story of Durvashas. Sri Krishna bathed in payasa pudding. Once Durvasas came to Dvaraka, where Krishna and Rukmini looked after him to his heart's content. Though at times he took only meager food, at other times he destroyed everything he saw and created trouble. Krishna and Rukmini served him according to schedule. One day the sage asked Krishna to cook some pudding, and it was got ready. Then the sage asked Krishna to smear Krishna's body with pudding. Krishna did so, except on his feet. After that, Durvashas got down the chariot, and making Krishna and Rukmini serve as horses himself, got into it and drove away in great speed into the forest. On the way, he thrashed his horses. Neither Krishna nor Rukmini felt sorry about this action of the sage. Okay. On reaching the forest, he halted the chariot and blessed Sri Krishna that arrows would not hit the parts of Krishna's body which were smeared with the payasa. The spot at which the sage blessed Krishna became famous as Varadana Tirtha in after years. It may be noted that Krishna died by an arrow hitting his foot, which was not smeared with the payasa. So, and then that says the citation is Mahabharata Anushasana Parva, chapter 160. Okay, so it's a bit convoluted, but there is a story extant about that, and it is in the Mahabharata or alluded to in the Mahabharata, and so it suggests that there is a shared strong mytheme between Krishna, who's Vishnu, and Achilles himself. But we've also seen Indra parallels and Arjuna parallels in Achilles. And then, like you mentioned, Athena is like paired with Ares a lot of times, and they are siblings, right? They're brother and sister, and so they share this similar role. And it is also the case that Athena in the Iliad sometimes appears in roles reminiscent of Krishna in the Mahabharata. She's kind of flitting around mischievously and causing things to go the way she wants them to, stirring up things and helping her favored heroes, right? And even we see her doing that by causing Pandarus to shoot Menelaus even, but then protecting Menelaus as well. So she's kind of, just working things to her own ends. And it's kind of like how Krishna appears in the Mahabharata, this sort of god behind the scenes, jumping around and doing these things. So there's a potential parallel, at least partial parallel, between Athena and what Krishna does. So the question then is, is it accurate to just see Achilles and Ares? Is it accurate to see this second function god at some level as already being a sort of mixture of what we would call Indra and Vishnu motifs and myths, right down to Ares himself? Or is there a different way we should see it? And how did this come about? Should we credit this Ares parallel to Krishna that I mentioned in the affair? Is that a strong Vishnu aspect of Ares that we should treat as well? And yeah, should we see that just the Greeks kind of combined the Indra and Vishnu a lot in these figures, but setting Heracles aside, of course, seemingly, or not 100%. Even Heracles you can see some of the well, there are certain parallels that can be drawn even with Heracles and like Cuchulainn, right? So what do you think of that?
So I think it's legitimate to talk about a sort of fusion of Indra and Vishnu traits, and I think it's probably rooted in the very close connection between the Indra type and the Vishnu type. So obviously, Indra and Vishnu in the Vedas are very close. They often appear together, and sometimes the exploits of one of them is also credited to the other one of them, or they're credited with them together. So it's sort of hard even to distinguish what exactly did Indra achieve as opposed to what Vishnu achieved in the Vedas. And this obviously takes a very interesting turn in the evolution of Indian religions after the Vedas, because Vishnu seems to become the most prominent deity in some sects of Hinduism, and still seems to become more prominent than Indra in most contemporary sects of Hinduism anyway. So much of the original Indra material is also transposed onto Vishnu in this post-Vedic material. So obviously, just as some Indra and Vishnu intermingling and bleeding of traits of one of them into the other of them has happened in India, there's no reason it should not have happened in Greece as well, and maybe in other branches too. So we should probably um, look for that as well in other branches. Now, Athena is often a Vishnu or Krishna parallel, and I think it's pretty solid in the Iliad, especially. So obviously, um, it makes sense for Ares and Athena, for Ares and Athena, to be a sort of couple in the way that Indra and Vishnu are, a couple of brothers, or brother and sister in the Greek case, who represent the second function most clearly. Obviously, the story about cheating on, with the wife of the fire god that we see in both the Odyssey and in the Mahabharata necessarily requires a second function deity who is male. So Athena, who is a female and also a virgin goddess, could not possibly be involved in a version of that story. So, in my opinion, it's obvious that in that specific instance, it was only natural for Ares, who is a sort of Vishnu adjacent Indra type, to become the recipient of this tradition, to become the Vishnu analog in this specific instance. This is pretty much natural. Now, the being shot in the foot is very interesting. It's definitely not random that Achilles and Krishna both die in that sort of way. But this also begs the question of which version is more conservative. So obviously there is a narrative need in the Mahabharata for Arjuna to survive beyond the end of the war, and so obviously he cannot die as Achilles does during the war. So maybe the Mahabharata innovated and shifted this from an Indra type to a Vishnu type, so that the Indra type could have some sort of death together with the other siblings, with the other Pandava brothers and their wife Draupadi, as is told towards the end of the Mahabharata when they ascend on Himalaya and gradually um, fall during their ascent. So it's possible that in this instance, Greek is more conservative than Indian. It's not. It's never anything that we should rule out. Obviously, a great way to understand whether whether the Greek or the Indian versions are more conservative would be to look for another version which is neither Greek nor Indian. So obviously, when we have three or more versions to compare, we can see what elements are maybe more ancient, more proper to one god type or to another. But lacking another version, or maybe we do have it and we haven't recognized it yet. It's hard to say which one is more conservative in an Indo-European perspective.
There's
Obviously,
there's a strange sort of like theme of Vishnu types or Vishnu adjacent or theoretically Vishnu types where they will like lose a leg or something along, or lose both legs, lose one or two legs. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the same motif as the one that we're discussing. So yeah, it's a question mark on that.
yeah. So mm, definitely, I mean, it's worth investigating what exactly is maybe Indra and what is Vishnu. We already kind of did quite an interesting work maybe with Mitra and Indra. So I guess that we should be doing the same
Yes.
with Indra and Vishnu. Basically, that's
Yeah.
sort of a direction we should be taking.
Well, I would just say
Yes,
that the warrior gods have always been like the most challenging and confusing to me. So I'm always open to more, yeah, ways that we can clarify. 'Cause I think it's just because of this intense overlap that we've described of Vishnu overlapping with Indra, overlapping with Trito, of course, and they overlap with Vayu, and so it gets messy with a certain warrior related feat can be interchangeable among warriors sometimes, at least. So one thing that what you said, I think you make a really strong case. One thing that for me, it's like it's hard to 100% believe that the Greeks would take on a purely female Vishnu, right? And of course they have Typhon though, so that could take the male side. Because you're saying one solution to this that would be very clean would be if Athena is the Vishnu, and then they needed to displace the sort of male centric Vishnu type myth about the adultery. They needed to displace it onto the other warrior god because he's male, and so that's how that could be cleanly understood. But then it means that their main positive Vishnu is purely female as Athena. So that's entirely possible, but it's sort of hard to believe since he's so prominently male and a warrior. But of course, he does have, even Vishnu has a female side, has a female incarnation or aspect rather. So that is there as a possibility. But then there's like the alternative of what if like Ares and Athena together are the male and female sides of the Vishnu, and they just had like a combined Vishnu / Indra traits into one from the beginning or from an early point. But I do think what you said takes care of a lot of the issues. So maybe it's a cleaner way to look at it. I still think it's hard to say if they would have just like the entire positive Vishnu side taken by Athena. But she's such an important goddess that maybe that's what they did, right? And so, what would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that having Athena as Vishnu and Ares / Hercules as Indra is maybe a bit cleaner, but clean is often, convenient from our perspective, but doesn't necessarily always line up with the
Hmm.
with the historical situation
Yeah,
that
that's very true.
comprise the mythology. So it's never um, reasonable to use cleanliness alone, to use
Yeah,
straightforwardness in Occam's razor
yeah,
alone when dealing with history where maybe Occam's razor hasn't been followed so
hmm
rationally.
yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely
So
also possible of having Ares as a sort of Vishnu that accumulated some Indra material. Um, it's also interesting that Heracles as a hero obviously could have sort of a different line of development compared to Ares as a god who is not ever a hero, right?
right.
Heracles is also a god. He's both a hero and a god, and the Odyssey tries to reconcile this. Having Heracles himself on Olympus and a shadow of Heracles among
Mm,
the mortal souls in the realm of Hades. So
right.
it's an attempt to come to terms with the dual nature of Heracles. With Ares, it's much more straightforward because he's just a god. So on the one side, there's a Vishnu material that needs to be split between a strictly male and a strictly female character, and then we have some Indra material that needs to be arranged and split between a hero who is also a god and a
hmm
god who is not also
Yes,
a hero, right?
yes.
It's a
Yeah,
matter of
it's
balance,
fascinating. It is
basically.
a matter. It's a matter of balance. It's a matter of kind of perspective and guessing on some of exactly how you come down on that. I think at this point, maybe in the future we can find something really objectively convincing one way or the other. But yeah, I think mileage will vary with how you interpret that. I do think it is something that jumps out at people, at least just lay people when you first come to it. The fact that it seems like Ares is being portrayed as more terrible, more sort of bloodthirsty, and just havoc of war embodiment, while Mars gets a more, he's more in the protector warrior role. And it is possible to, and this is just the process my mind went through, approaching the material, but that um, Cuchulainn and the Vishnu type is sometimes seems more terrifying as the embodiment of sort of, the outburst of the rage of war. The name Nate among the Irish means like dangerous. Essentially, he's the dangerous god of war. And so, and then you even have in, I think, Spain, they have Mars NATO, who seems to be a clear equivalent of Nate. He's NATO, but he's being equated with Mars. So you then, but he's a Vishnu. He's presumably the Vishnu type being equated with Mars. You see the overlap there. You see that he can be treated as equivalent of Mars, like the Romans would do that with that Vishnu type. So yeah. The other thing, other than, I think that's just something that that leaves people wondering about this. Is Ares a more sort of bloodthirsty embodiment of just pure carnage, whereas Mars is more this like god, more contained within society in a way. Like Indra is one of the main functional gods. He's the sort of protector, and of course he embodies war, but as something more social in a way, or whatever. And then on top of that, just the presence or absence of lightning and thunder. So is there anything that you went through that connected Ares to lightning or thunder in particular? Is that another sort of spot that would raise questions? Yeah.
So Ares and thunder. I'm not sure about the Greek material. There might be something, but I'm not really sure about that. I would have to look that up, as opposed to maybe Mars, where this is much clearer, and also Hercules, where we have seen it in the Orphic hymn. There's the verb to thunder thrown in there.
Yes.
Um, Actually, I was thinking about what you were saying just before asking the question
Yes.
about the contrast between Vishnu and Indra and Ares and Heracles, and maybe Vishnu and Ares as sort of more violent and bloodthirsty and
Mm.
destructive forms of the deity. And I was thinking about two things. On the one side, I was thinking about a Mahabharata episode. It's probably not in the critical edition, but it's a local version of the Mahabharata. As you all know, there are various versions of the book with many additions depending on place and sect, in which one of the sons of Bhima is beheaded, but his head, which is still talking, so very similar to maybe Bran or Orpheus in that detail. Well, the talking head is placed on a hill where he's able to watch the rest of the Kurukshetra war take place.
Interesting.
At, at the end of the war, all the warriors who have survived, which are not many, um, ask this head, "What did you see?" And his answer is that he only saw Vishnu and Kali.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
Kali is obviously the goddess of destruction, so no surprise there. But the fact that he saw Vishnu alongside her as one of the destroyers, right, of the destroyers of impiety, destroyers of basically everything that was in the battlefield. So Vishnu is here strongly characterized as a destructor, even
Right.
though the usual
Oh.
ready-made understanding in the West is that Vishnu is more of a
And
preserver and
the
Shiva
thing
is
is,
a destroyer.
yes, but the thing is, Vishnu also is a preserver. So it just depends the moment that you are,
Yeah,
what
and this
story you're
actually
looking at.
ties back into what was I going to say, which is that both Ares and Vishnu are both protectors and destroyers.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think it's actually unfair and reductive not to take both aspects into account.
yeah.
Obviously, he's a warrior god, so like every warrior god, and to some degree, Indra and Mars and Thor and other deities as well, he has to preserve the functional order of society, which is obviously the trifunctional Indo-European traditional society.
Mhm.
But to preserve the order of this society, it might be necessary to kill, destroy, even in terrible ways, even using trickery, even using any sort of disproportionate violence. But it
mm,
is necessary in the European perspective and in the perspective that we might attribute to Vishnu and to Ares. It is necessary to destroy the enemies.
mm,
It's a crucial part of Indo-European tradition. The enemies have to be either subjugated if they peacefully surrender, or actually destroyed.
mm.
And this is pretty much fundamental. You
Right.
cannot just have one aspect or the other. And this actually ties very well with other types of deities, especially the Rudra type. The Rudra type is the one who can bring about illness, but can also bring about health. This is not a contradiction. It's sort of a feature that the deity can both do something and do the opposite of the same thing. He has a full power over that range of abilities and situations.
Mm. Yes. Yeah. Very, very nice. So yeah. So along with another thing that would be sort of helpful or help us determine where to draw the lines and that sort of thing would be um, the sort of along with the lightning or thunder would be like rain and crops connections. Of course, that isn't really what we have with the quote unquote agricultural side of Mars. Is it rain and crops? But it is. We do see that with somewhat connected to Indra, at least storm rains. I don't know if it's quite the same thing there. But then Thor, I think, does have maybe more more lines drawn between Thor and the Rains, perhaps. Something else I'd have to check on though. But yeah, with Mars, is there anything really the quote unquote agricultural side of Mars? Is there anything with the rains and fertility?
Not really, just with thunderbolts. Obviously,
Right.
thunder is seen as a fertilizer of the earth, so it
Ah,
could be loosely agricultural, loosely related to weather phenomena, but it's not strictly about rain. I don't see anything about Mars as a god of rain,
right. I don't
nor
remember there. I don't think I remember there being either. That's why it was all focused around Mars as the protector of the field, like its boundary, and certain festival or rites that were connected to that, rather than actually bringing fertilizing rain per se. I think so. So the absence of rain with Aries would, as far as I know, you could tell me, are there connections to rain or fertilizing with Aries, or that's not really anything I've ever seen.
I also don't remember anything about Aries and rain. I think that rain is pretty much strongly
Zeus.
tied to Zeus in the Greek
Yeah,
conception. It's
and that makes
pretty
sense.
it's pretty hard for any other deity to be ascribed the phenomenon of rain.
Yeah,
Maybe Hera as a goddess of the
maybe
air,
maybe
maybe
Uranos.
Poseidon as a god of water. Like, no, not definitely anything to do with Aries.
Right, right, right. So the absence of fertilizing rain is it's not a it's not really a great determining factor because Mars doesn't really have that. But it is another thing that um distinguish that there are connections to rain with Indra at least. So there is something there that's slightly different to think about. And there are connections to rain with Thor as far as I know. But again, I'd have to have a reminder on that. So okay, well, that's those are my main thoughts. I think to me, yeah, Aries is a complex picture, a complex figure. So I I don't want to like come down on saying that I fully understand Aries, but it's good to like list out all the points where you can draw the comparisons, so then the picture can be as clear as possible for people, I think, and they can try to understand that. But you do have Heracles, who seems a very mythically. He has more myths that you can draw comparison to Indra specifically, but then he also has potentially a Vayu aspect side, um, which complicates Heracles, at least according to Dumézil's reading, and it seems to make sense. I think that there's like a Vayu aspect there as well, which we've discussed, sort of the overlap of Indra and Vayu. I think we've discussed it pretty thoroughly so far as well. So any final thoughts or points that you think we left out, or are there any other thunderers outside of, we've discussed the Mediterranean? Are there any other that we should mention briefly or have time to mention briefly, in your opinion,
I
that
don't
are
know if you
crucial
mentioned the
to touch on?
Slavic and Baltic comparenda already, so maybe, I mean, you did already in the other stream, maybe there's no need to go back on that.
Yeah. Well, people know that I'm not much of an authority or too knowledgeable on the Slavic and Baltic material, unfortunately. And you guys bring in stuff, you and Arno bring in stuff on that sometimes, which is helpful. So, and also many of my commenters have a lot of knowledge on that as well. And, they can kind of draw the connections as well as I could on those particular topics. I guess there is the question just of the Proto-Indo-European connection between, like, is it Perquunos, whatever the Proto-Indo-European reconstruction of that name is, the connection of that to the Proto-Indo-European Indra is an interesting, maybe a sticky topic. Do you have any thoughts on how the name Perquunos, whatever the Proto-Indo-European version was, how that connects to what we've been talking about, these non-Balto-Slavic thunderers, where they go back to a PIE root?
So the name Perkunos, as has been reconstructed, would only really fit two names in attested in European languages, which are Perkunas in, I think it's Lithuanian, and I'm not sure if Lithuanian or Latvian, but maybe it's Perkūnas in Lithuanian and Perkons in Latvian. I wouldn't swear by that, but it's probably how it is. So the Baltic forms of the name, and then we have Fjörgyn in the Norse mythology. So we have this kind of homology in the name, right? Now Fjörgyn is obviously not the same as Thor in attested Norse mythology. I've seen some people try to claim that Fjörgyn is the original name of Thor, but I think it's pretty much a slippery slope. If we have only two strong comparanda for that name, which are perfect formal matches, or maybe three in like one in the Germanic branch and one in the Baltic branch, I feel like
Now,
we do not have a strong evidence to say that the name was the original name of
right,
Thor. Like it just doesn't
right.
follow, right?
Okay, this is one of the things that always slips out of my mind. I can't keep the details straight, but I swear that we would need Arno here because he has gone into this, and if he can comment, maybe he can comment if he's busy. He can comment on the stream after it's done. But I thought he said that Fjorgen, doesn't come from, actually, it's not actually matching Perkunos. Potentially, it's instead matching with Parvati. Is that true that those are
So
different,
yeah,
or are we
that
talking about the
actually,
same?
I think I actually also wrote about this possibility, but it was a long time ago.
Yeah,
I
maybe it
don't
was
think
you
I
who
have
brought
messages
this
anymore. But
information. I don't know.
yeah, it's possible that the G in Fjorgyn is actually from an original like W kind of sound. So yeah, it's definitely possible. So
Okay, maybe
even
it
more
was.
so,
Yeah,
I don't think Fjorgyn as the original name of the thunder makes any. I don't think it's logical to assume really.
yeah.
Uh,
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
so yeah, it's definitely possible. It's also interesting because we have a female Fjorgyn and a male Fjorgyn. The female Fjorgyn, in my opinion, would probably be a good match for Parvati
Yeah.
in both name and content, in mythic content, right? So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And so it would probably be unwise to give a different etymology to the male Fjorgyn as opposed to the female Fjorgyn. So I mean, That's definitely to
Especially,
take into account.
yeah, especially when we have Parvati, her father is Parvata, and so that's why it seems, you know, at least a strong possibility that the same thing is happening with Fjorgyn and Fjorgyn. I forget which one has two N's, but in any case, yeah, it's a potentially matching pattern of daughter and father with male and female versions of the same name. Presumably, if you interpret the father Fjorgyn as being the same word as his daughter Fjorgyn. So, like you said, it would be kind of, you need some good evidence to say why the father with almost the exact name is somehow a different name with a different etymology. That would be strange, right? So,
Yeah, and also how it would not be applied to Thor ever. Like that's also part
yes, that's big.
of the
Yeah.
question. Like why no source ever applies it to Thor. So Perkunas and Perkons, so the Baltic and Lithuanian forms are obviously the Latvian and Lithuanian forms, which are both Baltic, are clearly related between them. Slavic Perun is a bit difficult because we do see that it's very similar, and the deity represented by that name also seems to be similar. But the loss of that K sound is just not something we can justify easily, so we have to assume that maybe some reshaping happened, that the original name was reshaped after another word, and which was the closer to the original form. We don't really know whether Baltic or Slavic was more conservative in this specific regard, right? Baltic is usually more conservative in other regards, but it's not necessarily the same on this specific name. Then some people have brought up Parjanya, which is apparently an epithet of Indra or a minor deity of rain in Vedic material. Parjanya is obviously not a formal match of either Perkunas or Perun.
Hmm.
So this begs the
I'm
question.
very, yeah, skeptical of Parjanya
Yeah, it
connection.
just doesn't work linguistically. It
Okay.
can only work if we assume that extensive reshaping has changed the name in each of the branches.
Yeah.
I'm
So,
open to the possibility it's not impossible, but
mhm,
then why did it happen? How did it happen? It would be pretty hard to pinpoint and to argue
yeah.
conclusively.
Yeah, like you said, I'm open to that possibility. Maybe it is, but the I would need to see where it's an epithet of Indra. I like maybe you're right. Like, are you pretty sure about that, or you're just kind of like trying to
I
remember?
mean, no, I'm not
Yeah.
sure whether it's ever explicit that
Yeah.
Parjanya is Indra. It might be an inference that some people have made
Right.
because obviously a rain deity whose name is pretty much obscure and doesn't really have much mythology
Yeah.
could be understood as an aspect or mystery of a more prominent rain deity. But I'm not sure if it's ever explicit, if it's ever quote unquote
Okay.
canon that these
I'll have to.
identifications take
Yeah.
place.
I'll have to sift through a bit because it's entirely possible. It's entirely possible. I'll say that. But Parjanya, yeah, it seemed like reading in the Vedic material, it's Parjanya takes seemingly a separate role from Indra and seems to be um, somehow associated with, like the udder of the cosmos and the rains coming from, the the pre-cosmic um, ethers of the sky or whatever, what have you. Somehow evenly, associated with almost with like the rains of the yeah, just the almost to like the frame of the cosmos itself or something. And so that could be connected as an aspect of Indra, especially if it was just like if the name itself just implies rains and then just gets applied as a additional by name when Indra associates with rain himself. That could happen, but I would definitely want to pinpoint that to be sure before going on before really looking at that further. So it leaves me a little bit skeptical about, yeah, like you said, the etymological link, which is also shaky. So anyway, something more to sift through for sure. It is all part of this broader question of how does this reconstructed perkunos connect to the other thunderer names, and seeing how and if they come from a shared deity. And you get, of course, like in the West, you get names more connected to uh, Thunnor and Taranis, which seem to be, Taranis, I guess, is just like an inversion of some of the letters that come from the same root as Thunnor, presumably, right? And and then there's different variations on that type of name. And then Indra is this separate name that only crops up in the Vedic, and also it's in the Iranic material as a demon. So how do you think? Yeah, can we have any ideas of how of if the Perkunos name does connect to the same thunderer deity? Do you think that's fair to say? And does the Perkunos reconstruction have any validity as like the prominent reconstruction of the thunderer name, or no?
So I think the linguistic reconstruction of Perkunos is definitely not a strong one. It just doesn't really fit the criteria for reconstructing a protoform in Proto-Indo-European. Obviously, we can speculate about some sort of protoform that has been corrupted by reshaping, folk etymology, taboo defamation, everything of that sort can be invoked to try to justify the differences, the phonological differences between the forms of the name. So how does that possibly relate to the root of Thunor and Taranis and other names? We don't really know because I don't see any branch in which we ultimately have both names alongside one another, except Germanic, if we accept that Fjorgin is derived from Perkunos, but that's probably, as we said, a weak connection, or at least a weaker connection than the alternative of Fjorgin being related to Parwata and Parwati as a female name. So, yeah, in my opinion, we definitely would not have any way to figure out the relationship between these two names unless we actually found both in the same branch. Uh,
Right.
and so obviously this doesn't happen. It's
Hmm.
possible that they were simply local variants of the name of the deity, that maybe the same deity was known with different names and epithets in different parts of the Indo-European world. That's definitely possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's also possible that there are some sort of aerial spread. So we do know, of course, that Indo-Iranic and Balto-Slavic peoples have been in contact with each other after the original separation of Indo-Europeans, and they have also been in contact with some Uralic peoples and maybe other peoples. So it's also possible that the name traveled through that kind of road, right? In some ways, which are not direct inheritance. Although that would also beg the question, how would they go about borrowing the name of a deity instead of inheriting it? It's also
Right. Right.
every solution to the problem seems to open up more questions that would require additional solutions. So
Yeah.
everything is pretty murky, and I also think it's definitely a shame that in branches such as Baltic and Slavic, we do not have that much documentation and that much early documentation. So maybe if we had ambiguous attestations of the names of the Baltic and Slavic thunder deities a few centuries before, maybe we would be able to ascertain whether one branch innovated in historical times, but we simply can't do that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's confusing, especially. Well, yeah, you're looking at the potential need for borrowings to have happened in some of these scenarios, right? And just yeah, so it makes you, but we can be pretty confident that Perkunas and these related names, that they are of the same deity type, going back shared with a root with Indra and the others, right? Would you say that's pretty easy to say, or is that complicated?
Well, I mean, based on what we know, it looks like Perun and Perkunas and Perkons are all thunder deities, and they're all somehow associated with war, possibly also with oaths. So it it seems to point to the same second function deity, which might have overlaps in the other functions, which is sort of a feature
Mhm.
of second function characters who really tend mm, to integrate and absorb traits from every other function.
Yeah. Okay.
So they, at least for the Baltic and Slavic, I feel like it's pretty solid, and like the names could ultimately be related and just have been reshaped
Yeah.
in the different languages of the Baltic and Slavic families. As for Parjanya, it looks like a bit harder to assess. Um, is he the same as Indra? Is he a different deity? Is he a minor deity? And if so, was he originally more prominent? Or, there are a lot of questions of Parjanya that um, are simply mm, too hard to assess,
Hmm.
having nothing comparable from the same time period in Baltic and Slavic
Yes.
material. And then if we also reject Fjordgyn as a homologue, then I mean, of course, um, we're not talking about the same kind of deity, the same deity type, or the same name even. So we have even less material to try to make an assessment or a comparison.
So it's it is such a confusing topic. It becomes important, of course, when we look at, in the Vedas, Indra seems to be raised to the level of the main god and even attributed sovereignty in the hymns that I touched on in last stream, as sort of the center of the wheel and all of that, like that metaphor that was in that hymn, and then you look at Perun. I think Perun must be the most fully fleshed out one. I'm not actually certain if that's the case, but maybe Perkunas is the same way. Maybe someone could tell me a bit more about that. But there is this concept that in Slavic material, Perun is more of the king of the gods or the prominent central god, and so it raises this perennial question of, like, if the Slavic and the Vedic material is saying the thunder is the king, why shouldn't that be the why isn't that pointing toward a Proto-Indo-European state of things, or why shouldn't that be given more weight? And therefore, how do we assess what occurred exactly, and how do we assess exactly where that connects at that root, at that shared root? So and that connects, like I said, to the name, the disjunction between the names too, because it's like, is if Perkunos is the Proto-Indo-European name, and these branches we mentioned have the closest name to that Proto-Indo-European name, then that gives more weight to that state of, what they have preserved. Potentially, it gives some validity that they have preserved something very archaic. And so, yeah, all these disjunctions and how they connect do become important when you try to envision and try to reconstruct the order of things on the Proto-Indo-European level and how they split apart, right? So they are important questions, even if we can't actually figure out on that level what happened.
So yeah, I feel like there's a lot that you're basically bringing up, and that is really hard to solve. For instance, the relation between linguistic conservatism and mythological conservatism. And I think one of the main issues is also addressed and partly solved by Nick Allen by showing that the second function hero somehow tends towards um, transcending functionality. And this is also, I really think, fitting for characters such as Heracles, who have the three sins of the warrior. They're still qualified usually as second function figures, as warriors, as some sort of young heroic men who wield weapons, so that the kind of F2 type clearly, but they still commit sins and have, or faults, or however we want to call them, and have to undergo some sort of remediation and expiation for these in relation to each of the three functions. So they are figures who encompass and somehow are out of each of the three functions and somehow are reintegrated into each of the three functions. And I think this is actually pretty relevant to the character of the thunder type, of this warrior type, or however we want to call this specific type.
Mm-hmm.
But it's clearly a feature, it's clearly a key feature actually of understanding this sort of character. Even identification with the sun that we've seen with Heracles mostly makes sense in the perspective of the sun as the center and equipoise, and this also means equipoise between the three functions in an Indo-European perspective, right? So there's plenty of evidence from each branch, including, of course, the Baltic and Slavic branches, even though maybe the evidence is documented only in later times compared to other parts of the Indo-European world, but it's still relevant evidence that
Mm-hmm.
that this sort of tree functionality was a part of these of the thunder deity even in these cultures, right? So that even in these cultures we could have a king of the gods who is a thunderer, who is also in some versions a patron of oaths, uh, which is usually an F1 first function kind of topic rather than F2.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And one thing that is a curiosity in the Irish material is that we've kind of pinpointed that Delvaeth, Delbaeth, who is said to have as his other name Lugith, or Lugith Mac Tail, Tail, that these names seem to be in the position that we would expect the Purusha type. So, like, Delvaeth has the word fire in it, Ith, and the Purusha is this precosmic fire totality of the Godhead, and it ends up shaping the cosmos with the heat from it, creating the cosmic egg, even in the Shatapatha Brahma and different versions. And in any case, it is, it is this very high totality of the Godhead, and it seems to be that Delvaeth is that, and Lugith is the other name for it, and then that's why the different Lugith figures end up dying in these sacrificial tableaus, and also why they, in a couple different um, variants about different Lugiths, they are somehow attributed with these divisions, either their body, Lugith Red Stripe, his body is divided in three portions. Um, and, there's like the seven Lugiths who, the chief among them fathers the single Lugith Mat Khan. This is very much like the seven Purushas congealing together to make the main Purusha in the Shatapatha Brahmana and all this stuff. So anyways, we have Delvaeth, aka Lugith, and so that's a figure who is Lu coded because his alternative name is Lugith, or even his main name in some instances. It means he has the sovereignty as his as one of his main names. So you can call the totality of the Godhead by its title of sovereignty, the sovereign God. But that doesn't exhaust what it is, right? It is this prism of the totality of Godhead, and the Rudra type is there as its mind or essence in some way, whatever word you want to use. The Rudra is there. The other gods are there as well, and it is made of fire. It is Delvaeth, so Ith is there it is composed of the fire god, which is Agni in the Purusha. So it's very complicated. But what we also have is that Delvaith is interchanged with the name Turin in one or two instances in the Irish material. So Turin, as we discussed last time, appears in this role that seems to be the probable thunderer role. His name is very close to the word for thunder, but not quite the same. So it seems to be, a shifted name of which was originally, the thunder word, but it came to be its own name, plausibly, very close. And he has this mythos where his sons are sent on a sort of suicide mission, and then when they die, of course, he grieves over them and weeps until he dies, essentially like an image of a thundercloud exhausting itself in rain, and also paralleling Arjuna when his son dies, Abhimanyu, who we already discussed, and paralleling Achilles when Patroclus dies in some ways as well. So he's plausibly, a fragmented survival of the thunder god Turin is, and then but Delvaith, who is this name for the precosmic godhead totality, really, is the name Delvaith is sort of like curiously swapped for Turin in one or two instances. So basically, Turin's three canonical famous sons are Brian or Brian, and then Ayukar and Ayukarba. So very easily recognizable trio of names. But in one instance, it says that, let's see, in one instance, Delvaith is identified with this name Twiril Bicrio. Okay, very strange name, Twiril Bicrio, Tuirillbiccreo, and that figure is said to be the father of Brian, Ayukar, and Ayukarba, who are the sons of actually Turin. So it's a strange swapping of names or even confusion of names, where Delvaith seems to be placed in the role of the father of Turin's sons, therefore in a complicated way, suggesting identity between Turin and Delvaith. So with all that said, my point is that it could be pointing to this potential for the thunder god to sort of take the symbolic role of the totality in certain, from a certain angle in certain instances, right? Maybe or it could be pointing to the lightning being identified with fire, like we've discussed, and with the sun, so those things run together. That's another possibility. But it does open it does open these pathways, these to think about how the thunder god can get identified with the godhead or the lead sovereign god, like you were just describing. There are these ways where he can step into the role of the totality, and so there are these curious points in the Irish that are worth considering, whether those suggested an esoteric sort of identification of the lightning god as potentially being another name, another worthwhile esoteric identification with the Purusha. But then again, you also have to then step back and say, well, then the Purusha, aka Delvaith, is also identified with Lu, and is also identified with I, the fire, and is the totality. So it can kind of slip back and forth, right? And so it depends on your tradition and what really gets firmly placed, what God really gets firmly placed in the role of the sovereign, and how that can happen. So we can kind of see how that has shifted, and it can just be a slight matter of emphasis shifting sometimes in different traditions, leading to the thunderer being sort of placed in that role versus the actual, the quote unquote sovereign god, the Zeus type, which is actually a different type. And because they're similar to begin with, they can take the same role in different branches, and even it can even lead to these confusions that we see, and that we're hopefully trying to bring some clarity to. So hopefully that is something more to think about to end with. And do you have any final thoughts or any final clarifications that can help people gain clarity on any of these issues?
So I think that we have said enough. I don't think we really have anything else to add on top of that. So for final clarification, I would say that these thunder god, even though we conventionally may call him a thunder god or a warrior god, but he's always much more than that. He's clearly a figure associated with the second function, with using weapons, with partaking in war, but he is also a figure that in every one of the various branches also spans beyond that and seems to encompass and relate to in some way or another to each of the three Indo-European functions, and that this is pretty evident in both the hymns that we read of Hercules, or Heracles as we want to call him, and of Ares. So it's definitely something to look at in a comparative perspective. We can also find the same for Indra and for other types, for other expressions of this type in the various traditions. So definitely that is that is pretty much how we can sum it up. A figure who is transfunctional, but especially related to the second function, and where thunder can be an important aspect, but it doesn't always have to be, as it may not be for Aries, for instance. And so that is maybe a clarification that some people will need to have. Like I've seen some comments that were maybe perplexed by the thunder god terminology.
Right, that's a good point. And like we said, it just means that there was this Proto-Indo-European god who was probably associated with thunder originally, but specifically he held, the warrior function, which is the second function in society, as we discussed. And yeah, and then when that god gets taken into multiple different branches, anything can happen. Anything can be de-emphasized or shifted. So we are trying to get back to that original. Who shares a shared root, and who is the real, who can you identify with good evidence, um, actually one-to-one goes back to a shared root as much as possible, of course, rather than who, in the final outcome of all the splitting off, who now holds the lightning. That's not what we're really interested in, because we're saying that can be deceptive, because the lightning can either shift hands or it can just be given a different emphasis, and really in the Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European picture, multiple gods probably already could hold the lightning and did hold the lightning, including the sovereign, and therefore in offshoot, the sovereign as opposed to the warrior thunderer, and therefore when things split off, as in the Greek case, it is primarily Zeus who holds the lightning, but then you've mentioned, did you mention other Greek instances of lightning wielders, or is it
So there
primarily
is one
Roman?
specific episode in which Athena borrows Zeus' thunderbolt and uses it against Ajax,
Mm-hmm.
who committed a sacrilege, the rape of
Yeah.
Cassandra inside the
But
temple
still
of
Zeus's
Athena.
still Zeus's lightning though.
Yeah, I mean, it's generally framed as she borrowing that thunder. So that's pretty much it. In
Mhm.
Greek tradition, it seems like the thunder
Very
has been
Zeus.
largely centralized in the hands of Zeus,
Yeah.
and other deities either do not use it at all or only use it as a concession from Zeus himself, right?
Right. Well,
That
yeah,
seems
okay.
to be the takeaway of Greek
Yeah,
material.
and that is fair, and it's his property in that conception. So yeah, so hopefully that clarifies. We are not talking about who has the lightning or thunder per se, although a lot of times they do. We're talking about who can you trace back to this second function warrior god, who originally was probably not the sovereign, but who was like a usually a specialized like a storm god, but not the sovereign. Okay, and the word thunder is just a convention to help us have a single label that we can try to pinpoint, and that just it helps discussion if we know what we're talking about by that, but it can be confusing if you don't know where we're coming from on that. So, all right, well, Josephus, it's always excellent to get a chance to hear your takes on these complicated issues and get a lot more information on a lot of them that I don't have clarity on, and that we can bring that information to everyone. So thank you for taking time today to discuss this with me in a lot of detail and at length. And so that was very enjoyable. And thank you to everyone for listening, and have a great day.
Thank you for inviting me. It has been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll see each other for the next stream, probably next week.
Absolutely. That would be great. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
See you.